All right, Alexander, let's answer a lot of the questions that came in from our live stream yesterday. And I'm just going to jump right into it. Obviously, most of these questions, I would say probably all of them, have to do with the crisis and the conflict in Ukraine. And I will be pulling from Rumble, Odyssey, Locals, and YouTube as well. So let me pull up some of these questions. We'll have questions. We'll have just viewers who have said hello or have given just very quick feedback as well. So let's just run through all of these. And thank you once again to everybody who has given us these questions and who has taken the time to contribute to the conversation. And let's begin. Let's draw from. Let's go to YouTube. Let's go to YouTube, and we'll get the questions there. Some of the super chats and the questions through the YouTube chat. We had Michael who joined as a community member, and we had Toilet Sauce here with a question which says, "The West is throwing darts at a soap bubble. I am convinced they are engineering their own economic collapse because it is easier for them to blame it on Russia than to admit their entire economy is a bubble waiting to pop."
Toilet Sauce, I'm going to suggest that you read the latest article by Michael Hudson, one of the greatest economists in the world at the moment, in my opinion, but he makes exactly the same point that you have done. I mean, what we have done over the last year, last few weeks, rather, I'm not talking about year, the last few weeks, is we have hastened the collapse of of the dollar system, and with it of the economic structures upon which the West is built, and that's Michael Hudson's view, and I think it's also corresponds with yours, and I love the point about throwing darts at a bubble, because ultimately the Russian economy will adapt. It'll go through a difficult time, but it will adapt. Our economy, by contrast, the global Western economy, is structured in a way that makes it far more difficult for us to adapt. How do we adapt to a world trading system which is totally differently configured and where the dollar doesn't have the central role that it has today? No doubt it can happen, but how exactly is it going to be done? And who's preparing for it? No one is.
Yeah. Radovid said, I heard that the fertilizer price in Slovenia had doubled since last year.
Yeah, I've heard the same. I've been getting, it's happening everywhere, and not just Slovenia. And I mean, it isn't just that the price is doubling, it's that there is actual physical shortages. And those are going to get worse. And, it's going to really badly impact. And with the ports now essentially closed so that these things can't be exported, the Russian ports essentially and the Ukrainian ports being closed, we are looking at a really, really bad situation. I should say I've been getting a steady stream of commentaries from a gentleman in Washington, D.C., who is very much involved, I think, in GOP politics. I've mentioned him many times on various programs, and he's been raising the flag about the danger with fertilizer since at least November. And he's right. And what he was pointing to as a disaster, a pending disaster in November, is evolving into an outright catastrophe.
Yeah. Valley, yes. Thank you for that super chat. And Sterile Neutrino says, weak politicians, crazy decisions, cultural Marxist revolution. Could the West eventually be hit by neo-Franquist conservative counter-revolution? Interesting question.
I'd love to think so. Well, every reaction sooner or later sparks an opposite and equal reaction. I believe that's true in physics, and it's certainly true in politics. And I am sure that there will be eventually a swing. The big question is, what will be left when it happens? I mean, the damage that's been done is enormous. Alex and I always used to say before the change of administrations that if the current administration was elected, it would be a disaster. Even I did not anticipate that this would be a disaster shaping out so fast.
Yeah, agreed there. Zariel said, let's get ready to rumble. And on that note, Zariel, I'm going to pull up a question from Rumble. Euro Gabor said, after yesterday's meaningless UK V4 summit, the Hungarian foreign minister is in Serbia negotiating energy and trade. Guess via which third country Hungarian products will reach Russia. Sanctions are useless.
Absolutely true. I presume it's Turkey, but I mean, I'm going to just guess. I mean, but sooner or later, I mean, trading systems will adapt to this. They always do. The trouble is, the damage that's been done in the meantime is incalculable, and it's been primarily done to those countries that ultimately are most dependent on world trade, which are the Western economies. This is something I find very difficult to understand, that people in the West don't understand this.
Yeah. Novis sent us a super chat via ODYSEE. Says, I think I can send you tips. Yes, you can, Novis. Thank you for that. And King David the Wick said, also, only a few minutes ago, I tried to access RT's channel, and it is now working. It went out right after the war started. I'm located 65 miles due east of the Dnipro here in Ukraine. Wow.
Wow, interesting. Well, I'm going to make a guess. Actually, I think that some kind of private deal was done, because I've noticed that I can access, for example, not just RT. It's not entirely smooth, but you can get it. You can get the website, but you can also get Russian government websites, which are unobtainable also. And I think that there's been some kind of a deal done in private. And I notice that the BBC is continuing to keep English language journalists. It can't provide information to Russians, but it can provide information to Britons, for example, from Russia. And I think that some kind of deal was done, and maybe there were also threats that if this continued, there would be retaliatory action. I mean, I don't know what exactly has happened, but certainly there seems to have been an easing up over the last few days.
Well, I will say in Greece, zero access to RT, anything. Right. App, website, zero access to Sputnik News, but we do get TASS, which is interesting. So I don't know.
It is interesting, yes. TASS has never been affected, but the Kremlin's website, which was down for ages, is now working. For example, you can access it again. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very, very troubling. Let's go to locals here from
very troubling.
Very troubling. From Share 555. So the U.S. invaded Iraq over WMDs that were not found, and that was justified. The U.S. admits to WMD in Ukraine labs, and Russia is not justified. Did I get that correct?
You didn't get it exactly correct, because, of course, they're not admitting to WMDs. They're admitting to laboratories, which they're not.
Research facilities.
Yes. Laboratory research facilities, which they're not telling us what these were doing, and they're not explaining why, if they're such benign and benevolent things, nobody was told about them before. And they're not telling us either why it would be particularly concerning if the Russians were able to obtain control over them. So I think you're 99% right. Yeah. The only word I don't quite agree to is they haven't admitted, at least they haven't expressly admitted, but you could take what they did say, what Nuland said, as practically an admission.
She was careful not to say weapons, as she said research facilities. But obviously we all know what's going on.
Yes, it's one of these lovely American bureaucratic expressions, collateral damage, all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Did you see the tweet from, I think it was the Pentagon, Alexander, or the State Department? I forgot which one, but they sent a tweet out last night which said, just to make it clear, the United States of America does not own or operate biolabs. Yeah. Own or operate.
I know. Exactly. Which is very comforting, because nobody's ever suggested that they do. Exactly. What's been suggested is that they have biolabs that they've been funding and which have been doing research for them, which is something different. And apparently on a very big scale, or so it seems. And it's interesting, by the way, that's indeed, absolutely. And it's interesting to see that this is, I think, did you say it was the Department of Defense that gave that?
I think it was either defense or state.
Well, why would they do? Why would either of those departments say that? Why not have, the Dr. Well, anyway, the
Dr.
medical
F,
authorities in the
no.
US, Dr. F and people like that. I mean, surely they're or the science people come out and say something like that. Anyway, just saying.
He's used to funding these things anyway.
He certainly
David
is.
David S, thank you for that super sticker. Darlene Namaho, thank you for that super sticker as well. Nitswitch says, with all the friends the U.S. made in the last decades, is anyone really considering selling gas and oil to them? Now Russia doesn't.
Well, indeed. I mean, there's going to be. I mean, we've got into a situation now where the Gulf monarchies are not even answering Biden's calls. I mean, that shows you what they think of Joe Biden. I mean, they never had any. I mean, I've got to say this: Donald Trump never had trouble getting people like MBS to speak to him.
Yeah, this would have not happened under Trump. I know people get so mad if you say that, but really, it is the truth.
It's true.
This would not have
it's
happened
absolutely true. He would never have happened. No.
Yeah. Lady Cosmica says, hey lads, formerly Cosmic Rain here. How are you two doing today? Thank you for that super chat. Dave Mueller, thank you for that super chat. Jake Kaiser, thank you for that super chat. John Pauli, thank you very much. Dave Mueller, thank you again. And Sidebook VR says, in South Korea, moving from talking about why Russian tanks are crap to why Russian planes are crap. Progress.
No, yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, they always say this thing. I mean, people. I've been reading these sort of things since always every discussion about Russia and its military always tells you how crap everything it produces is. I mean, it was if you go back to the Second World War when the Germans went in, they were saying the same, except it turned out otherwise.
That's right. John Iwanek says, Blinken suggested Poland give MiG-29s to Ukraine. Poland called the bluff and offered MiGs to the USA instead. Only when we learned from the Pentagon that this was a bad idea. U.S. is luring Poland to provoke Russia. This is true. Luring is a good word.
Well, it's a very, very, very good word, and it shows you how dangerous the guys in the State Department are. I mean, this whole operation, this whole crisis has been authored in the State Department. And the MiG-29 idea is zany. It's crazy. It's a terrible idea. It's the Polish government cannot be accused of being at all sympathetic to Russia. Said absolutely, we're not doing this. And the Pentagon has said that this is an incredibly bad idea, and we're not doing it either. And yet, the State Department won't drop it. They still go on pumping it, just as it was Blinken who basically gave the green light for the sanctions on American oil imports and tried to get the Europeans to join as well. So it tells you where the hardliners in the US are located.
Absolutely. Summer of 1970 says, ain't no war but class war. Very true.
Yeah.
Very true indeed. Nicholas says, big fan of Tom Lungo and the Duran. This is a dream come true. Yes, it was great to have Tom on the show.
It was great to have him, and we will no doubt again. Absolutely,
yes, absolutely. And Sanjeva says, "What do you think about the Russian central bank holding half their foreign reserves in the EU when it was obvious that the EU would retaliate against Russia? Shouldn't they have moved the reserves prior to the conflict? I don't think they had half of the reserves in the EU.
No, I think we've gradually come to realise that significantly fewer of the reserves were held in the EU than people had realised. I mean, I'm not an expert on these things, but I understand for technical reasons you have to hold part of the reserves in particular locations. I mean, you can't avoid it. Arguably, that was a mistake, but I'm going to say something else. The central bank, its major error, in my opinion, and this, I've been saying this in the past, not so much recently, is that they are very much people who wanted to become part of the central, community of central bankers. And they wanted to give the impression that they're a good, well-run, orthodox, financially orthodox central bank. And they valued that interaction with the West. And of course, they had the belief, maybe some of them did, that central bank reserves are covered by the doctrine of sovereign immunity, which they are, by the way. Freezing and seizing them is illegal. I think that it was difficult for these people who are fundamentally, as I said, want to be part of this club. It's very difficult for them to understand or accept that something like this would be done to them. But I think, I'm going to say this also, I think the seizure of the reserves, there's the eye-catching thing, is not actually the big problem. The big problem is that because the central bank is sanctioned, which again it shouldn't be, I think that's completely illegal, but the point is that it cannot interact with key parts of the Western financial community. So, for example, if a Western bank holds rubles and wants to sell them, the central bank can't contact that bank, that Western bank, and buy those rubles from it. So that prevents the central bank taking action, unrestricted action in the foreign currency markets. And I think that's probably a bigger problem for the central bank than the partial seizure of perhaps 30 to 40% of its reserves.
Yeah. Black Tie, thank you very much for that super chat. And Yoav Bressler, thank you for that super chat. John DeNugget says, onward, courageous Duran. Thank you very much for that. Raul says, thoughts on Venezuelan oil and how it will help the U.S. in its ban of Russian oil?
Well, first of all, I don't know whether that's going to happen, but the idea is, and this is where Tom Longer is incredibly useful, the oil refineries in the southern United States are designed around Venezuelan heavy crude, which is extremely heavy, apparently, as oil goes. Now, I'm not going to get into a discussion about what that means exactly, because I'm not really a geologist, oil trader, an engineer. But anyway, suffice to say that Venezuela produces a certain type of very heavy crude, very different, say, from Arabian light crude. And refineries are designed to process a certain type of crude. Now, when the US slapped sanctions on Venezuela, these refineries had to start using similar crude. So they imported it from Russia. And that's now been restricted. So the idea is you go back to Venezuela. Problem is, firstly, you have to do a certain number of things. You have to lift the sanctions on Venezuela. And that may be extremely difficult to do. And there might be opposition in Congress and from some of your friends. And that might be unpopular, at least with some important people. But secondly, you have to get the oil industry in Venezuela up and running again. And that is going to take time. I've seen some people say it would take at least 2 years. So this is not going to solve the problem fast.
Not at all. Let's go to locals. Real Lot No Sense says, does anyone know how many labs in Ukraine are of those which were officially opened, financed by the U.S. to keep the specialists from going rogue after the USSR broke? I don't think anyone has.
I've heard 26
to that.
I've heard 20,
but
I've heard 26. I don't know
really,
whether that's true or not. We can't really
we can't really confirm that. So we just don't know.
Yeah, interesting to see that they still need to be paid to be kept from going rogue 30 years after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Exactly, and they have to be kept secret as well.
And have to be kept secret as well.
Yeah, incredible story.
I wonder what these guys were doing, by the way. Yeah, I really do wonder what these guys were doing. I mean, whether they'd be paid just to turn up. I mean, it's.
The mainstream media narrative, in order to cover up for this, is saying that they were, being used for defensive purposes, or that they were just, researching very benign things like, better ways to use chemicals on fertilizer and growing food and stuff like that. So, it's ridiculous stuff that's coming out now to cover this up.
I agree with that.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Zarael says, this is directed to Tom, but we'll answer it. Do you agree that cryptos are the goal to kill cash? The algorithms of Bitcoin is very similar to that of Tor or another agency program. So they want it, but lie to us. So we go for it. The Great Reset.
I have to pass that on to you, Alex. Yeah,
Look,
absolutely.
I think I think cryptocurrency is a way to alleviate people from the restraints of fiat. It's just a better way to. It's a better, a purer form of money, actually, a freer form of money. But the Great Reset is predicated on central bank digital currencies, not on blockchain cryptos, decentralized blockchain cryptos, to be more precise. So the Great Reset is, the digital yuan, the digital dollar, the digital
Yeah,
euro, Bitcoin, and stuff like that
indeed,
is a
and
whole
and the
different deal.
digital ruble, by the way,
And the
which is
digital, yeah.
coming. Uh, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. David Bauer says, explain the downside of rounding up all the world's billionaires to someplace like Guantanamo.
Well, I mean,
There a
let's
downside?
say, I mean, they made some of them have made invaluable contributions. I mean, look at the invaluable contribution Mr. Gates has made to medical research.
With that medical degree. Let's see.
Yes,
AD
with that
says,
medical degree.
yeah, is there any reason to believe that Zelensky will end up like Pachinian, Armenia, who, despite being a NATO agent, the Russians know about that. He surrendered to the Russians and stayed in power. That's a very interesting observation.
Very interesting observation, and it's not impossible at all. I mean, I don't think Zelensky has deep political beliefs, if I have to be straightforward about it, and I wouldn't be surprised if that indeed happened. But we're not there yet, and it might not. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Foxtrot says, "How do we get more people to break out of this new mass psychosis? It feels like another mass psychosis. Yeah, after the coup,
Well,
now you have this psychosis. Yeah.
I think I said on the live stream yesterday that there's a joke floating around, apparently very common in Hungary, that Putin killed the coup.
One
Anyway,
mass psychosis to
but
another.
look,
Yeah.
the only thing one can do is try to do what we all do, which is try to keep a level head, explain things in a rational way, and hope that sooner or later reason will prevail. Sometimes one is challenged in that belief. I have been a lot recently, but what else can we do ultimately?
Yeah. Web app Alex says, question to Duran: how would a post-war Ukraine look like? Territorial partition, occupation zones. If the Ukraine puts NATO neutrality into its constitution, wouldn't Ukraine at some point get election results that would make a constitutional amendment possible, especially if the country is partitioned off and only the pro-Western parts remain?
There are so many good questions there to which there are no practical or simple answers. I'm going to say straightforwardly, I think that assuming the Russians are able to get the Ukrainians to agree to all that they want to do, whatever fragmented Ukraine is left will eventually become a Russian satellite. I think that's, baked in the cake now.
Turius says that Hungary and Poland still didn't get their share of the slush fund from the Eurobonds. They are going to veto it
No.
this time.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think this. I mean, well, I hope I don't have to explain why, but I am dead against Eurobonds. I think they're a disastrous idea, and they have no foundation, legal foundation or basis in the treaties. I mean, they're illegal.
Yeah. Monkfish says there are multiple conflicts happening all at once in Ukraine and outside of it. That much is clear. Ukraine has taken on this mythical status, for better or worse. The angle I want to explore is the war inside the U.S. Be under no illusion.
Yeah.
The U.S. is running the conflict with Russia. This internal battle at the nucleus of the empire begs the question, at what cost? What are your thoughts?
That's an incredibly insightful question, actually. I agree, by the way. I mean, there are conflicts in Ukraine. There are multiple conflicts in Ukraine. I saw a Russian commentator, by the way, who was discussing this, and he was saying that even for Russians, the conflict in Ukraine has something of the quality of a civil war about it. Because, of course, for Russians, even Russians in Russia, the connection to Ukraine is so deep and so enduring that it doesn't feel to them like a foreign country, a fact which Westerners seem completely unable to understand. But, let's put that aside. Let's focus on the US as well. I think this is absolutely right. I think that there is a level at which the conflict is a conflict between America and Russia. But this conflict between America and Russia is really in itself an echo, if you like, of the deeper conflict, which is the conflict within the US itself. And that has taken all sorts of morbid manifestations. It all swelled up to the surface after the 2016 election. We saw with Russiagate how Russia was in effect used as a sort of symbol in this internal conflict that's been raging in the US. And I'm afraid the fact that there's so much intensity in the conflict with Russia suggests that there's a huge intensity in the conflict that's playing out in the US itself. So I think it's a very insightful question.
All right. Elena Diaz says, is there any path back to normalcy? How?
I have come round to the view floated by a Russian official that the only way back is to what was called during the Cold War peaceful coexistence. In other words, Russia and the West go their separate ways. They interact when they have to, but they each lives their own lives without trying to interconnect with the other. All that has happened through the attempts that were made after the Cold War to build these bridges, to establish these commercial economic links, is that either the West tried to basically take over Russia, which is what happened in the 90s, or when the Russians pulled themselves together and started to work on more equal terms, well, that simply caused aggravation and anger in the West. So, let's put all that behind us, all this idea of friendship, all this idea of, normal, everyday commerce. Let's go back to peaceful coexistence. It provided a stable framework to manage relationships during the Cold War, and let's go back to that now.
All right, Teo, thank you for that super sticker. Sarah, thank you for that super chat. And then thank you for that super chat. And Sanjiva says, how realistic is it to replace 2/3 of Russian energy imports in Europe, as Timmermans stated, by the end of 2022? Without bias, is there a way to do this?
It's not possible. I mean, it's utopian. I mean, it couldn't be done by 2025, let alone 2022. I mean, Timmermans is talking nonsense. What is astonishing about this is I'm sure they all know it. I mean, perhaps not Timmermans and the ideologues around him, but just to give an example, I mean, he talks about increasing imports of liquefied natural gas. There aren't the terminals in Europe to do that on that kind of scale. You'd have to also ramp up production of liquefied natural gas to extraordinary levels. Within the time frame that he's saying, this is impossible. All right, if you want to do it over 5-10 years, well, then it becomes possible. But in the time frame that he's talking about, it's utopian.
Ronald asks, what are Eurobonds? But Turius answers, and let me know if this is correct, bonds issued by Europe as an organization where all member states are reliable for it.
Turius has described it exactly right.
Exactly. All right.
Exactly right, yeah.
Jay Duresk says, Jay Dura, Esquire, says, Wall Street is standing against Biden, the WEF, while EU is all in on Davos. Where do you, the city of London, fall on all of this, which would seem to me to be pivotal?
Question. I think the City of London is quietly horrified. I mean, I never. I used to have quite a lot of contacts there. I don't anymore. But I mean, the whole philosophy of the City of London is that it's always open for business to everyone, and it survives on it. I mean, bear in mind, we're not a giant continental economy like the US is. I mean, Wall Street can be Wall Street simply through the financing of the US. Britain can't be like that. The City of London can't work in that way. So I think the City of London is utterly horrified about this. Of course, at this moment in time, they can't say very much, but I think they are privately horrified. I think the European financial community is horrified too. And perhaps the most interesting fact so far is that up to this moment in time, no single Western bank has closed its branches in Russia. You've got Shell pulling out, you've got Zara, you've got McDonald's suspending their work there, PepsiCo, but no Western bank has so far done it. I mean, it's only a matter of time, I suspect, before they do. But the very fact that they're so reluctant to do it tells you how unhappy they are.
Right. Live Sovereign says, how do Eurobonds help with grain, gas, and oil shortages? Exactly.
They don't. They just, I mean, again, it's just a silly idea. But you see, the point about they're not intended to ultimately. Eurobonds is a way of floating bonds to raise funds to create another slush fund, which the European Union can use. That's what it's about.
Exactly right. Commando Crossfire says, I nominate Alex and Alexander for a Pulitzer Prize. Thank you very much for that, Commando Crossfire. Let's Talk TV says, watch the world's economy system change in real time. Russia, China, India, Iran, Turkey, Saudis, etc. are forming a new economic bloc.
Well, I'd be a bit careful about including some of these countries. I'm not sure what the Saudis are going to do in the end. But ultimately, I agree. I think you've got it right. I think there's going to be two big economic blocs, the West and the Eurasians. And that's, other countries outside these blocs are going to have to find ways of working and trading with them. But the big difference between these two blocs and the blocs which existed in the Cold War is that during the Cold War, the Western Bloc was hugely bigger than the Soviet bloc. I mean, the Soviet bloc economically was dwarfed by the Western Bloc. We didn't just dwarf it, but of course was essentially, the world economy was integrated into it. This time it's going to be different. And countries like perhaps Saudi Arabia will have choices, which they didn't do previously. And that's something that in the West we're not used to.
Yes, very true. Sparky says, will Turkey leave NATO?
I saw some opinion polling about this in Turkey, and it's very recent opinion polling, just before the war started. And I don't think it's changed. Turkish people do not like NATO. I mean, clear majority would be happy to go. Now, that, I have to say, surprised me. And as somebody who used to know Turkey, I used to know how pro-Western it was, it surprises me even more, actually.
Brian T. says, at the Duran, the Scottish government is trying to shut down the North Sea production.
Yeah.
Is that true?
So that's, see, this, I've heard a lot about this. I don't think they would do it. I've heard, this is ecological policies. But something has to give somewhere. If you're going to shut down the North Sea, which they've been talking about doing, well, because you want to do a Green New Deal, how are you going to keep homes warm? How are you going to keep factories running? Now, one of the weird things about Tindemans' ideas was, you're going to build lots more windmills. It's not going to help. It can't. So he can't do it. They were talking about keeping nuclear power plants going. Well, the Germans, the green ministers in Germany have already ruled that out because they're Greens. Yeah. How can they turn around and suddenly become advocates of nuclear power? So you have all this mix. They want to have everything at the same time. It doesn't work. You have to make choices.
Danish says, Europe is going to miss the planting season with the shortage of fertilizer unavailable in the short term.
Absolutely, and it is a disaster. And I know farmers.
Yeah. Harold says, is there any hope left now that we don't slip into a George Orwell 1984 scenario?
Yes, we must always keep hope. We're still able to talk. And we must keep on talking, and we must keep on thinking, and that makes it less likely. I don't think that it's going to happen because I think ultimately human nature is too resilient to allow such a thing to be imposed. But nobody looking at the situation in the world today would be complacent about the direction things are taking. So I think we must hope, but we must never be blind to the huge dangers.
Real Lot No Sense says all political ideologies end totalitarian. Codifying ideas leads to dogma and enforcement. Well said.
Yes, I totally agree. That is entirely right.
Yeah, and Ronald
That's
says
a very
Trump
good point,
would.
actually.
Yes, and Ronald says Trump would have deglobalized while encouraging domestic production.
That's exactly what his program was. There was America First. They didn't let him do it.
Paul
They
says
tried
what
to
will happen.
impeach him twice. They even tried to impeach him after he'd left the presidency, which I still find astonishing.
For speaking with Zelensky. On top
For
of that,
speaking
yeah.
to Zelensky, exactly on top of that. Yeah, no.
Jeez. Paul 88 says, what will happen to steel prices?
No, they're going to surge. Everything's going to surge. And bear in mind, countries that make steel, like China, are going to be, well, I mean, they'll have trouble adjusting, but they'll adjust. Countries that don't make steel, like most of the European economies, some do still, but, steel production in Europe has fallen very far. Well, we're going to be paying premiums with all this steel. And the United States, which used to be the leader in steel production, is going to pay a price too, because it will run down.
Fiona says, thank you, Alexander, for bringing Tom into your program. Tom deserves much more recognition than he currently has. I will second that
agree.
notion.
We both agree.
Absolutely. Radovid said, most simple building permits for energy infrastructure require years to be submitted and approved. I am enjoying the clown show.
Absolutely. Build a liquefied natural gas station, put it together in, 6 weeks. Try and do it. See how it works. I mean, you are so absolutely right in what you just said. I mean, what planet are these people on?
It's an ideological sickness is what it is. It's religion. It's religion. Sparky says, will Indian tech workers in the U.S. back India?
I think they'll try and stay out of this. I mean, I think they got very good jobs in the US, and I don't think they'll want to walk away from them fast. That's my own guess. And by the way, I mean, I don't blame. I mean, if that's their decision, I respect it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Francis says we need to keep nuclear power online and add more of it so we can get away from fossil fuel. Until we can do that, we need to use the gas and oil resources we have.
Absolutely, I completely agree. If you're so concerned about using fossil fuels, then, I mean, logically, you've got to build more nuclear power stations. Otherwise, you're going to have energy shortages. But, I mean, of course, we're not doing that.
Yeah, and they can't do it, not with the Greens around. Ronald says, if Putin has such strong support, why is he suppressing dissent so strongly?
Well, I don't think he's suppressing dissent so strongly. And I think that, as was pointed out on my own live stream by somebody who was involved in setting up one of these radio stations, which I think was Echo Muscovy, all of these radio stations and the newspapers were actually created with governmental money. So I think he does have a lot of support, but I think he's also, and the government is being absolutely careful that particularly at a time like this, they're closing down the hatches and they're not going to let people at a time of crisis, at a time when the country feels itself under sanctions attack, to create domestic political problems, especially as they see the West trying to launch a regime change operation in Moscow. I can't say I'm surprised. I would also quickly say, and this comes also back to something that I discussed on my live stream, that we've gone far further in the West. Not only have we basically cut off Russian media channels, but in the Czech Republic, it's become criminalized to say things about the Russian invasion of Ukraine which don't conform with the narrative. And somebody on the live stream said that it comes with a 3-year prison sentence. Now, I can't confirm that, but I mean, that the law exists, that I know for a fact.
Freedom Autopsy Report says Republic World, an Indian news channel, is very critical of Russian attacks on civil targets in Ukraine. Comments?
Well, India is a huge country, and there are many different people with different views there. That is, to my mind, simply a reflection of India's diversity. It's a huge country with a very, very widespread media. Most Indian media comment that I've seen has been taking a very balanced approach to this conflict, as has the Indian government.
Yeah, Lady Cosmica says, haven't got much to say right now, so I'll let my donation do the talking. Thank you very much for that. Ralph says, good lessons, thanks. And Too Small says, why there is no news about the 7 billion US steel from Afghanistan. The US stole from Afghanistan. It's only 7 to 8% of US imports of oil, unless the gas increases to $2 to $3 per gallon. So, okay, so it's a two-part question. First part is Afghanistan and the 7 billion.
Yeah.
And then the second part is about U.S. oil imports, 7-8% of the Russian imports to the US.
The seizure of Afghan central bank's assets is a hideous scandal. And there should be far more said about it. I mean, all right, I accept most of this money was donated by the United States, but you gift somebody something and it becomes their property. You can't just come along and take it back. It belongs to the Afghan central bank. It's protected by the doctrine of sovereign immunity. It belongs to the Afghan people. The United States first froze the money and then stole it. It's giving half, as they say, to the 9/11, the families of the 9/11 survivors, and it's giving the rest to NGOs, who are, of course, all the friends of the administration. So, I mean, it was a profoundly shocking thing, and it's going to create a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. By the way, when the whole sanctions debate over Russia started, I did say to myself, was this perhaps a trial run? And were they going to try to do the same with the Russian central bank? Well, I don't know that for a fact, but, obviously, given the events, maybe that speculation, which is hovering at the back of my mind, that speculation perhaps had more foundation than I was prepared to acknowledge. But anyway, that's one thing. Now, about the imports of Russian oil into the US, statistically, it's not much. It's about 8% of US oil imports. But it is most of US imports of heavy crude. Now, southern refineries in the US use heavy crude, which they previously imported from Venezuela. That is why the United States has been importing heavy crude from Russia. It is going to create disruptions within the US oil market. But of course, it is doing something else, which is, as an interference in the global oil trade, which it is, it's going to have a knock-on effect on every single part of it. And that inevitably is going to create shortages and a rise in price far beyond the amount of actual crude that is involved.
All right. Sparky says, will election fraud continue to prevail in the West?
Yes. if these economic problems are going to get as bad as we think, it'll get worse too.
Yeah. Iris, thank you for that super sticker. Commander Crossfire, thank you for that super sticker. And Too Small says, the UK has the North Field oil. What about Europe?
Yeah, we don't. In fact, if you look at European gas and oil and gas production, it's falling. I mean, European natural gas fields are becoming depleted. So, Tindemans can say what he wants, but geology and supply impose their own realities.
Exactly. Sparky says, will Biden send the UK spam to eat like in World War II?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a boy, when I was a child, we still ate quite a lot of spam in Britain.
Thank you very much, Sparky.
Some people even acquired a taste for it, which is
people like
there
it.
We go.
Absolutely. Jay Galt says, Jay Galt says, deglobalization is equal to Bronze Age collapse.
Well, deglobalization might be equal to Bronze Age collapse, but what eventually came of the collapse of the Bronze Age is the Iron Age, which is technologically more advanced. Let's hope and see. But I know what you're referring to. There was this period, and I think it was the 9th century, when suddenly civilization across the Middle East and the Mediterranean, where it was, centrally located, suddenly went through a profound crisis. Well, I hope it's not going to be anything as bad as that.
Guy says, where can I find Tom's article on gold? You can find Tom's link in the description box down below, both from the live stream and from this video. Vincent Clark says, any positives that can come from this?
Yes, I think, as I said, in a way, in terms of the Russian-Western relationship, we are. This is a clarifying moment. All the hopes, which once I had, that we'd find a way around and we'd get on with each other, and we'd start to trade in a normal way. I think we now realise that's never going to happen. So better that we just put all that aside, coexist with each other peacefully, and then maybe in time we can start to look at establishing more normal relations with each other. But whilst this ideology prevails, while these visceral feelings continue in the West, it's clearly hopeless.
Yeah, Ralph says, could widespread privatization for Western consumers contribute to a popular acceptance of escalations leading to ultimately nuclear conflict? See examples World War I and World War II.
I think you meant privations. I hope not.
Privation. My bad. I read it wrong.
Privations. Yes, privations.
Yeah.
I certainly hope not. Of course, in the Second World War, the Great Depression did play a central role in leading to the Second World War. But I hope not. I hope instead that what it will do is bring about an acceptance of reality and a rejection of the political leadership which has created this disaster.
Yeah. Forever Ever says, just read in the Daily News that they destroyed the Russian that had the episode on Snake Island. Is it fake or real?
I think everything like that is fake. I
think Snake Island, just chalk it up to a
the whole business. Yes.
It's a made-up story. They got the island, they got the 80 soldiers, and that's that.
Yeah.
Christine, thank you for that super chat, Christine. And finally, Tim Gibson, thank you very, very much for that super sticker. And to everyone watching this video, that covers it. Questions from ODYSEE, Rumble, Locals, and YouTube. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. The Duran.locals.com.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your great questions as well. Fantastic questions and comments. And 10% off. Go to the Duran shop.